As managers with busy schedules and a lot going on, it can be really easy to get distracted when you're trying to listen to a team member. So what I'm going to do now is introduce to you something called 3 listening levels, which is really a framework to help you become more intentional in the way that you listen and to help you become aware when you are not listening. The first level is what we call filtered listening. When you do filtered listening, you are listening to what's being said and filtering that through the lens of your own experience, your own judgment, and you're trying to make sense and understand what's being said based on what you know yourself. This is where most of us operate in a daily basis. And so what we do here is we try to make connections between what someone is saying to us and what we know. I'll give you an example of how this might look. So if I have a team member that comes to me and they say, Allison, I'm so stressed out. I've had the worst day. I'm gonna listen to that and I'm gonna think to myself, okay, how has my day been? What's been going on for me? How do I make sense of what my team member is saying based on what I know about being overwhelmed or having a crazy day? So I'm gonna listen to what they're saying and I'm gonna think to myself, let me think about my own experiences. And often what that prompts is a response that sounds something like this. You've had a bad day? Oh, I've had a horrible day too. Or, oh, you've had a bad day? I've had a really great day, okay? But what we're doing there is, again, trying to make sense of what we're hearing by attaching it to our own experiences. And what often happens when we do filtered listening is we cut off the conversation. So a team member comes to us to say something, and because we begin to focus on ourselves in order to make sense of what we're hearing, we lose sight of what's important to our team member and perhaps what they need or what they're asking for. So one of the impacts of using filtered listening is that it often cuts off conversation and refocuses the conversation from the person who has initially been speaking to the listener, to me as a manager. So there's a real danger in doing filtered listening because you can end up hijacking the conversation and making it about you when in fact the conversation needed to be focused on your team member. So one of the things that you can do when you find yourself making those gestures and responding in ways that start to redirect the conversation is to instead become aware of when that's happening and push yourself to a deeper level of listening. And that next level, which we want to look at, is called empathic listening. When you do empathic listening, you are setting aside your own judgments, your own experiences, and instead you're focusing on what the speaker is saying and how that speaker is impacted by what they're talking about. So an example of this might be, if we're to take the same example from before, a team member comes to you and they say something like, I'm feeling so overwhelmed, I have so much work on my plate, and I'm really having trouble managing it. In empathic listening, you're gonna set aside what's happening for you and how you might be feeling about your own workload, and instead ask yourself the question, how might they be impacted? How might they be feeling? And what that allows you to do is create a pause in the conversation where that person is still invited to keep speaking. You may be prompted to respond by saying something like, that sounds really difficult. Tell me more about what's going on. Or, why are you feeling so overwhelmed? But you're not redirecting the focus to be about you and how overwhelmed or not overwhelmed you may be feeling. Instead, you're focusing on that person. And one of the things about these skills is that oftentimes we can learn about them and test them out in our personal lives as a way of getting comfortable with them and using them in the workplace. And so when I learned this concept of listening levels, one of the first places that I applied it was actually with my husband at home, because it's a safe space to try these things out. And what's interesting is that I thought about myself as a pretty good listener when I was learning these skills and working in this field. And what I learned over time is that I had a lot of growing and a lot of expanding to do to really become a good listener. And one of the first times that I consciously applied this technique of deepening my own ability to listen was actually at home over dinner with my husband. So I'm going to share with you how that happened to give you a clear understanding of how this looks. So when my husband typically would come home from work, we would ask each other, how was your day? Right? Standard question. And what I typically was doing without being aware of it is that when he would tell me about his day, good or bad, I would very quickly respond by telling him about my day. So if I said, how was your day? And he would say, I had a really, really rough day. Lots of meetings, and I was jam-packed through the day, and I had no time to focus on all the priority areas that I knew I needed to get done today. And as he's talking, because I'm doing filtered listening typically, I'm going through my mental Rolodex of all of the things that have happened in my day. How many meetings did I have? What were my priorities? Again, trying to make connections, but my response was always something like, oh, you had a bad day, or you had a really busy day. Wait till you hear about my day. I had such a busy day, which often had the effect of making it a little bit competitive, which wasn't my intention, but because I was sort of talking about, God, listen to how busy my day, or my day was really relaxed, it set us up to have sort of a back and forth conversation without ever going deeper into what both of our days were like and how we were impacted by that. So when I learned this, one night, my husband comes home and I say to him, how was your day? And he responds by saying that it was a really tough day. He had just started a new job and he was feeling really overwhelmed. And for the very first time, I consciously applied this framework. And before I responded by telling him about my day, I just asked myself, I said, how must he be feeling? If he's saying that he's overwhelmed, if he's saying that it was a really tough day, just how might he be feeling? And so I just waited and I said, tell me more about your day. And he said, it was a really tough day because I'm in this new job and I keep getting new tasks and new priorities thrown at me. And I don't feel that I can say no to anything because I'm so new. This was new information. And again, I had to resist the urge to do filtered listening and to problem solve for him and to tell him how he should resolve this situation based on my own experience. Instead, I had to hang back and listen to this and respond by thinking about how he might be feeling being new in this job and feeling like all these new priorities were being thrown at him. And so I responded and thought to myself, wow, this must be a really scary situation for him. He's in this new job, he's feeling vulnerable, he feels he needs to say yes to everything, and yet he can't necessarily do things in a quality way because of all these competing priorities. And so I responded for the first time very differently and said to him, that sounds really difficult. And that's all I said. And that became an invitation for him to expand on what he'd said and talk more and more about why this was so difficult for him. And what I learned through the course of that conversation was, interestingly enough, that what was really of concern to him was not just that all of these competing priorities were coming at him, but that he just really didn't know how to approach his boss and talk about this without putting himself in a vulnerable position and maybe losing this brand new job that he really wanted. And he was concerned about losing the new job because that would have financial impacts on our family. And so he was feeling really restrained and constrained by what he could do because of all of the different parts of this new situation. And if I had not understood that and taken the time to just listen to him, instead of doing filtered listening and just trying to problem solve, if I hadn't taken the time, I would not have understood that in fact there was a piece of this problem that was about our family and our finances and all of these other aspects that as his partner, I could be supportive with. If I had only heard the piece that he was overwhelmed and having a bad day and not sure how to manage these priorities, I would have been trying to solve that problem without really understanding everything else that was going on. And that was the first time that I consciously used empathic listening, and it had a real impact both on my husband and my understanding of my husband's needs in this situation. So those are the first two levels. We go from filtered listening, sort of superficial listening where you're thinking about your own experiences, to moving yourself to a deeper level where you're focused on the impact of what the speaker is saying to understand their needs and what's important to them. And then there's a third level, which we call dynamic listening. And dynamic listening is something that we do in particular when we're listening to multiple people talk. And so this might happen in a group setting, if you're facilitating a meeting, when you are finding yourself in the position of hearing multiple people speak with one another. And this could be in a conflict situation, it could be in a very relaxed situation, but what you do in dynamic listening is really a combination of empathic listening and something additional. So when you do dynamic listening, you will again set aside your own judgments, your own experiences, and try to focus on what the people who are speaking are saying and how they're being impacted by that. And you are going to look and listen for nonverbal communication and energy shifts that may be happening in the room. And when I say energy shifts, what I mean is, what are people communicating without speaking that may be indicating that they're being impacted by what another person is saying? So if I have two people in a room, and on this side, I have somebody saying something like, I'm feeling really overwhelmed today. You know, we've been working a lot of long hours to meet this deadline, and I feel like I'm doing most of the work and other team members aren't pulling their weight. I'm going to be listening to that person and trying to think about how they're feeling, how they're impacted, what the implications of what they're saying are, right? I'm focused over here doing empathic listening, and I want to look over to this person and really be listening for and looking for what are their nonverbals. Are they rolling their eyes? Are they crossing their arms? Are they really engaged? Do they seem to have questions based on the expression on their face? All of those things that they are communicating nonverbally indicate that there's a response, there's a reaction that needs to be facilitated or talked about or inquired about. That's dynamic listening. It's listening for what's being said and how others in the room are impacted by it. So when you do empathic listening, you're listening to what a speaker is saying and how they are impacted by it. When you do dynamic listening, you're listening for what the speaker is saying and how they're impacted by it, and how others are impacted by it. And that may be expressed verbally or non-verbally. And that's what we call listening levels. Stop. Okay, now we're going to talk about reflection. Reflection is another wonderful technique that you can use to deepen and enhance your ability to listen as managers. So when I say reflection, let's take a look at the definition here. Reflection is a listening technique in which you act as a mirror for the person who's speaking. And when you reflect, what you're doing is you are trying to listen specifically for the things that seem most important to the speaker. This is really important. You are listening for the things that seem most important to the speaker, not the things that seem most important to you as the listener. Okay? And the reason that you're doing this is to give that person an opportunity to see that you really understand them, that you're not judging them, and that you're staying focused on their needs, their interests, what seems to be really crucial for them. When you reflect, you act only as a mirror. You don't ask questions, you don't give advice, you don't take the conversation a step further. You just stay directly with the person who's speaking, and you literally share back exactly what's been said, focusing specifically on those areas that seem most important. If somebody says, for instance, I'm so excited we've been working on this project for 6 months and we rolled it out yesterday and we got a really good response from our beneficiaries and people are feeling really good about our services. I'm really, really excited, okay? If someone says something like that, that's a great opportunity to really demonstrate that you've heard what they've said. So you could say, so I'm hearing you say that you're really excited about how this project went and the beneficiaries are really giving you good feedback about the services, okay? You're just, again, demonstrating that you've listened and that you've heard what's been said. When you reflect, it's important to focus on the words and also the tone that's being used by the speaker. So if somebody comes to you and they're really upset, maybe they're angry, okay, and they're speaking in a very elevated tone and there's a lot of body language that they're using that demonstrates they're upset. When you reflect back what's being said, when you mirror that back, be sure that you're reflecting to some degree the level of tone that's being used. So if I have a staff member who comes to me and says, Allison, I'm so angry. I have been on time every day this week and the other members of my team come in late, which means that I have to stay later to make up the work that they came in late to do, and I'm so frustrated. If they say something like that, it's really important that I not reflect back by saying something like, so you're really frustrated that your team members have been coming late, now you've had to stay later, and you're feeling really, really frustrated about that because you're having to do more work because they're not coming in on time. The impact of having a blunted affect and reducing the tone so much is often it communicates to the person that you're minimizing what they've said. So even if you're getting the words right and you're pulling out the pieces that are most important, it's important also to remember to reflect back the tone. When you do this, you want to be careful. You don't want to match their tone so directly that you're actually escalating them further if they're upset. So sometimes I like to say to people, reflect back the energy, the tone that you're hearing, -1. So if somebody comes to you and they're really upset and they say, I'm so angry, you're not going to shout back at them. You might instead lower that volume just by a bit. So you're really angry, right? You're not really angry, you're really angry, right? There's emphasis, your face is expressing empathy and recognition, but you're taking that conversation, the tone of that conversation down just slightly, which helps to de-escalate people, but it also helps to communicate that you take this seriously, that you hear them both in terms of their words and in terms of their tone and their energy. When you use reflection, it's important to be aware that you have some options available to you. You can do what we call a close reflection, where you take exactly the words that have been said that seem most important, and you very closely reflect that back. And you don't add any language around it. So for instance, if somebody says, I'm really concerned, you're really concerned, right? Somebody says something and you mirror it back exactly. You also have the option to slightly distance yourself from a reflection. So you could hear somebody say something about another colleague. For instance, this person is so lazy. They come in late, they let other people do their work, they're a horrible team member. If somebody comes to you and shares that kind of information, it's important that they feel heard, that they recognize you understand what's been said, but you may want to make it very clear that you don't necessarily agree with what they're saying, and so you might choose to do what we call a distanced reflection, where you add something at the beginning of that sentence, such as, so what I hear you saying is you feel this person is lazy and they're letting other people do their work, they're coming in late, and they're really not a full contributor to the team. Okay? So I have added in that example, so I hear you say, you feel, right? I'm distancing myself ever so slightly from what that person has said. And that is sometimes a technique that managers feel more comfortable using, just to make it very clear that they're reflecting it back, they heard what's being said, but it's not their opinion. They want to create that space. And so you have those options. And there may be times when you choose to do a close reflection, and there may be times when you choose to do a more distanced reflection. Neither is right or wrong, but those options are available to you. One of the reasons that we use reflection, or many of the reasons, is that it helps to build trust between the speaker and the listener. So as a manager, there's a lot that you can do to build trust with your staff, right? We can set good expectations, we can delegate effectively, we can have strong opportunities to give feedback and really support the growth and development of people. Another way to build trust is to demonstrate that you listen to your staff. And this is something that often we take for granted and don't quite know how to do. We say things like, I hear you, I understand. But rather than doing that and saying those things, I recommend demonstrating that you hear, demonstrating that you understand. And reflection is a technique that allows you to do that. Reflection also prompts people to share more information. And so when you reflect, it often acts as a question. It becomes an invitation. So if a staff member says to you, I'm feeling really concerned, and you say, so you're feeling really concerned, it feels like a bit of a question, like an invitation. And what you'll see when you use this, and when we demonstrate this in a moment, is that people just naturally say yes, and then they keep talking. So yes, I feel concerned because I'm the one who's showing up every day on time. And that's how reflection operates, often as a way of expanding the conversation without you as a manager having to do the heavy lifting of asking a lot of questions or coming up with solutions. You're just staying very close to the speaker, reflecting back what you've heard that seems most important, using the tone that reflects their energy level to help continue that conversation to ensure that that person feels heard. It also gives staff members the opportunity to clarify what they're saying. And this is really important because oftentimes people come to us when they have a problem and they're feeling upset. We hear people come to us all the time and ask us to solve problems or help them out. And when this happens, we often see that our staff members are in a bit of confusion, in a state of confusion where they need help clarifying what's important to them, what they really need, what the problem is that they're trying to solve. So when this happens, reflection can be a great way of helping people hear themselves. So we want to demonstrate that we hear them and we want to give them the opportunity to hear themselves. So I've had situations where I work with a staff member and a staff member comes to me and says, this other member of my team is useless. They don't come in on time. They take way too long to get their work done. I see them, emailing with other people on staff when they should be focused on the task. They don't do anything. And I can listen to that. And one option I have is to say, okay, so how do you want to solve that problem? That's one option. Another option before problem solving is to spend time giving them the opportunity to hear what they've said. And so I might reflect that back and say, so, I'm hearing you say that that person is useless and has no business doing this job because they're spending their time talking to colleagues when they should be focused on their work. This person is useless, in your opinion. By framing that, just as they've said it, reflecting that back, oftentimes what happens is people hear that and then they take a step backwards and they clarify and they say something like, I don't mean that they're totally useless, but I feel like they need to be working smarter or more efficiently, or I'm really frustrated that I'm the one who's doing most of the work and they're getting all the credit, right? They start to clarify really what their concerns are, or at other times they say, yes, that's exactly it, this person is useless. And as a manager, that helps ensure that you really understand what this person's perspective is and how to support them through the process of problem solving. So it's a great opportunity to clarify. And then lastly, it's important to point out that reflecting and agreement are two different things. I often hear managers get concerned that if they reflect back what they've heard, they're indicating that they agree with it. So if somebody says, this person is a jerk and I don't want to work with them, so that person is a jerk and you don't want to work with them. If you say that, as a manager, are you saying that you believe the other staff member is a jerk and that that person who's complaining shouldn't have to work with them? No. What you're doing is, again, demonstrating listening and that you've heard this person and giving that person the opportunity to clarify. If you're really concerned that you may be perceived as agreeing, I encourage you to do a more distanced reflection, which will be sure to indicate that this is that person's opinion and not your opinion. Okay? As a trainer, it's great to kind of refer back to this picture, which you'll have in hard copy hanging on the wall, and you can hang onto the wall the label and put reflection right onto the picture. So that's a great way to kind of keep this technique in the room through the course of the coming days, and also make sure that people have a visual reminder of what that is.